आज की डिस्कशन में हम क्वालिटेटिव डेटा एनालिसिस की बात कर रहे हैं और इस क्वालिटेटिव डेटा में हमारे पास ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ डेटा आता है दैट कुड बी इन द फॉर्म ऑफ लेट्स से ट्रांसक्रिप्ट्स ऑफ इंटरव्यूज, कुड बी द फील्ड नोट्स, could be visual kind of things. I think इतना ज़्यादा डेटा है कि उसको मैनेज करने के लिए we have to really take lot of actions, activities are there. वैसे तो देखें कि क्वालिटेटिव रिसर्च और क्वांटिटेटिव रिसर्च दोनों में डेटा कलेक्शन में फ़र्क है, डेटा एनालिसिस में भी फ़र्क है, और शायद कभी हम ये भी देखते हैं कि दे आर क्रिटिकल ऑफ ईच अदर, बट एट द सेम टाइम आई ऑल्सो सी दैट देर आर नंबर ऑफ सिमिलैरिटीज़ विद रिस्पेक्ट टू डेटा कलेक्शन एंड डेटा एनालिसिस. सिमिलैरिटीज़ की अगर बात करें तो सबसे पहली सिमिलैरिटी की बात है कि बोथ आर कंसर्न्ड विद डेटा रिडक्शन. देखिए इतना ज़्यादा ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ डेटा जो आ रहा है, let's say in qualitative research, that has to be managed in such a way that it could be presented in a meaningful kind of way. इसी तरह जो हम बात कर रहे हैं क्वांटिटेटिव की डेटा की, उसमें भी वेरिएबल्स को मेजर कर रहे हैं तो पता नहीं 30 स्टेटमेंट्स बनाती हैं, 40 स्टेटमेंट्स बना रही हैं और नंबर ऑफ वेरिएबल्स, हर वेरिएबल के लिए हमने बहुत सारे एलिमेंट्स और स्टेटमेंट्स बनाई हैं. तो दैट्स आल्सो ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ डेटा विच हैज़ टू बी रिड्यूस्ड. दोनों में ही डेटा रिडक्शन की बात आ रही है, ऑल्दो द प्रोसीजर फॉर डेटा रिडक्शन इन टू कुड बी डिफरेंट. बोथ आर कंसर्न्ड विद आंसरिंग रिसर्च क्वेश्चंस. अब ये एक इम्पॉर्टेंट चीज़ है कि वी स्टार्ट आवर रिसर्च विद सम क्वेश्चन. अब दोनों में ही ये बात आ रही है. अब रिसर्च क्वेश्चन भी हो सकता है, क्वेश्चन के साथ उसका आंसर भी हो सकता है. हमारी रिसर्च किसी हाइपोथेसिस से भी शुरू हो सकती है, बट इन द केस ऑफ क्वांटिटेटिव रिसर्च दीज क्वेश्चंस आर वेरी स्पेसिफिक, हाइपोथेसिस आर वेरी स्पेसिफिक. इन केस ऑफ क्वालिटेटिव रिसर्च इनमें कुछ ओपन एंडेड की बात आती है, ओपन काइंड ऑफ क्वेश्चन की बात आती है, उसमें इतनी स्पेसिफिक नहीं है. ये जो स्पेसिफिसिटी की बात आ रही है क्वालिटेटिव रिसर्च वाले बाद में करते हैं, बट सर्टनली दे स्टार्ट विद अ क्वेश्चन टू विच दे वांट टू फाइंड एन आंसर. तीसरी बात है कि बोथ आर कंसर्न्ड विद रिलेटिंग डेटा एनालिसिस टू रिसर्च लिटरेचर. अब ये देखिए कोई भी रिसर्च है उसके लिए this is important that we take stock of the existing situation with respect to the studies on that particular issue. उसमें एक ये बात है, वैसे भी लिटरेचर का रिव्यू है, this makes the researcher wiser with respect to let's say the methodology, the methods which people have used for data collection, the methods which they may have used for let us say data presentation, and also this review of literature can provide the terminology, the concepts, the ideas. I think दोनों ही जो है रिसर्चर क्वालिटेटिव और क्वांटिटेटिव जो है वो उससे फ़ायदा उठाते हैं और उठाना भी चाहिए. फ़र्क कहीं और लेवल पे आ रहा है जहां हम डिडक्टिव और इंडक्टिव की बात कर रहे हैं, बट दोनों ही इससे आई थिंक मेक यूज़ ऑफ द रिव्यू ऑफ लिटरेचर. चौथी बात है बोथ आर कंसर्न्ड विद वेरिएशन विद रिस्पेक्ट टू द रियलिटी. जो हमारा क्वेश्चन है उसके अंदर जो हमारा वेरिएबल है उसमें क्या वेरिएशन आ रही है. both qualitative and quantitative researchers are trying to find out not only the variation, but they would also try to find out the determinants of that variation, the causes of that variation, or the effects of that variation on something else. फ़र्क उसमें ये है कि the quantitative researchers are more specific with respect to the numbers, whereas the qualitative researchers don't have that kind of approach. इसके बाद हमारा अगला जो similarity है, both treat frequency as springboard for analysis. I think that's important because the number of cases is the starting point. The sample size is the starting point. Similarly, when we talk about the qualitative researchers, they also talk about the number of cases. But I think the difference is that in quantitative research, the researchers use these frequencies, let's say in terms of percentages or the proportions, whereas let's say qualitative researchers, they don't calculate that kind of thing. They might talk only in terms of number of cases. When we talk about the number of cases, that's more like a frequency. So that is, I think, the starting point with respect to the data collection as well as data analysis. अगला point है कि both ensure that the deliberate distortion does not occur. The idea is that the bias in the data collection should not be there. Something which is intentional bias or unintentional bias. The quantitative researchers are very particular with respect to the objectivity, and they try to, let's say, consider the reality as something out there. And the idea is the researcher is trying to deal with the data or collect the data in a very dispassionate way. So there should not be any contamination of the information, because any contaminated information is not going to lead to, let's say, truthful findings or the laws or the principles or the theories. Same is about, let's say, qualitative researchers. They claim that they don't want to bring in the personal likings and dislikings, but they have more interaction with the, let's say, the subjects from whom they try to collect. It depends कि वो उनका data जो है वो subject से collect किया जा रहा है या content analysis के हवाले से देखें तो maybe something which is already there वहाँ से collect किया जा. But certainly they also try to look into the interpretations of the let's say subjects which they come across. But the biases, the possibility of the biases can come because the subjects, let's say, interpretation of the reality is again being interpreted by the researcher. So in that kind of situation, the biases could be prevalent, can emerge, but certainly they don't encourage that kind of thing. The idea is that they would like to also be objective. There should not be any willful, let's say, contamination of the information. They would also like to reach the truth. So that's a similarity. Another one, both argue for the importance of transparency. Now, when I talk about the transparency, that means whatever they are doing with respect to the data collection or data analysis, that has to be transparent. It means that the procedure used for the data collection should be laid down. Definitely the quantitative researchers do that kind of thing with respect to, let's say, population, with respect to the sampling or sampling design, with respect to, let's say, the score index, construction of the score index. I think they try to lay down, and that procedure is laid down in the research design. Similarly, we also see that the qualitative researchers try to be transparent. They should be transparent. And assuming that they don't do it, I think that's not acceptable, because even in the beginning, when a researcher is submitting the proposal, at that time, he or she tries to tell the reader how the data will be collected and how the data will be analyzed. So not only in the proposal, when we write the report, there too, in the qualitative research, we try to lay down the procedure for the data collection as well as data analysis. So that's trying to make things transparent, and also maybe this transparency could help anybody who would like to verify the findings of this particular researcher. It's easier to follow those kind of guidelines by given by the quantitative researchers. Maybe it becomes a little difficult where we don't have that kind of procedures for, let's say, collection of the sample and then statistical kind of analysis. So that is how they are similar. And also, both must address the question of error. Now, errors are expected. We don't expect, if we are talking about the quantitative research, we don't expect that the sample findings are going to be exactly exactly the same as the population parameters. The errors could be in the sample, usually referred to as sampling error. Errors could be non-sampling errors, but the chances of errors are there, and the quantitative researchers try to take care of those by giving some kind of margin of error with respect to their data. Similarly, the qualitative researchers are also trying to have some margin of error, but they also try to overcome these, trying to fit the data which they collect with the categories which they try to formulate. And finally, with respect to the comparisons, both have research methods appropriate to the research questions. The methods with respect to data collection, methods with respect to the data analysis. And the two, unless they have those and unless they specify those, probably the research process remains deficient. So the methods for analysis used by the quantitative researchers are more statistical. They have more statistical kind of tests over there, whereas in case of qualitative researchers, they don't use these kind of things, although when they have the mixed method, they might make use of those, but otherwise they specify their own methods. Their method starts with the inductive kind of method of data analysis. So with these similarities, then we move on to the data management. So with respect to the qualitative researchers, so research design includes the appropriate plan, some decision rules laid down, and there are so much data that maybe it's more like searching noodles from a soup. So quantitative researchers, they don't have that kind of step-by-step procedure for, let's say, analysis. That's more like linear kind of approach in the quantitative research. So they have a research process, and that process goes from one step to another step to another step. Of course, not necessarily that we cannot move to the next step unless we finish the other one. Some steps might be simultaneous, but certainly it is laid down that, okay, this is how they develop their instrument of data collection. This is how they move to the field and do the data collection. And then come back, how the data is then, let's say, cleaned and processed through the computer, and then something like that. Now, that kind of thing, I think, is difficult for the qualitative researchers. In the qualitative researchers, the data collection and data analysis, they are woven together. So usually it's going back and forth. People talk about iterative kind of approach, कि आपने डेटा कलेक्ट किया, उसका एनालिसिस किया, एनालिसिस करने के बाद again that analysis might give some kind of clue or guideline whether we are on the right track or we have to modify our track. So that is how they try to weave the data collection and data analysis together. That's, I think, one important difference. So qualitative researchers generate a large, cumbersome database because of its reliance on prose in the form of search data. And then the whole data is such a voluminous kind of data. In a way, we might say it is, a person could be very happy that it is so huge data or rich data, but sometimes somebody might say, hey, that's huge data, that's very attractive, but then it's also nuisance, and people might call it as attractive nuisance. Attractive to have, but it's really difficult, laborious kind of thing to really sort out something out of that huge amount of data. As I said earlier, it might be more like, let's say, sorting out or finding noodles out of a big bowl of soup. And to find out those, I think it becomes difficult. But when we find it out, that's really encouraging, and that's something to be enjoyed or to be looked at. So general strategy of data analysis with respect to the qualitative data is, as I said, it is iterative, repetitive interplay between the collection and analysis of data. So they are interwoven together. Nevertheless, some strategy needs to be spelled out. और ये अगरचे हम ये कह रहे हैं कि that is interwoven, they feed each other, but some procedure has to be laid down. So analytic strategy for the qualitative researcher has to be laid down, and that strategy is a inductive kind of strategy. So analytic inductive strategy is the focus of the qualitative researchers, because what they are looking for is the information, the data, the specific information, and from there they would like to develop their, let's say, concepts. They try to develop the codes, the concepts, the terminology, the categories, and from there on they would like to see how these categories are connected with each other, and from there, with this connection, they might try to develop their own hypothesis. And I think that's important kind of difference, where the quantitative researcher starts with the deductive kind of approach, using the theory, and from theory deducing the hypothesis, and then testing the hypothesis with the data. But here it is an inductive kind of strategy. So analysis is being done by following this kind of approach. So isme obviously a question is a prerequisite for every research. So the strategy starts with the question, and then we see that the question is explained. I think in both ways, both quantitative and qualitative researchers, they explain the topic of study, which could be in the form of a question. The question is explained, and also when the question is explained, they are trying to find out the hypothetical kind of reasons to answer to that question. That question could be an issue, a problem of the society. So why that problem is there? In order to answer that question, the qualitative researchers also try to find out, let's say, the reasons for it. And there they try to connect the reasons or the explanation for that explanation as an answer to that particular question. And they go to the field, they collect the data and try to find out cases which are, let's say, supportive of that kind of proposition, supportive of that kind of hypothesis. And they continue finding cases. In case they come across such situations where the case does not support the hypothesis, then they have their own strategies to handle that. Maybe they modified the hypothesis, or they might not include that case as a part of the data. So that is how they look into the deviant cases, the cases which don't support, and that is how the process continues till such time they think they are saturated in this approach. They have found whatever they were looking for, and new cases are not providing any information. So that's what they use a word, let's say, immersion in the data, or soaking in the data, or let us say coming to such a situation where people might call it as a saturation point, that beyond that no information, no useful information is coming. So they specify the conditions that are sufficient for occurrence of a phenomenon. This is something which they do, that they try to explain a particular situation. Let's say they come across drug addicts, and they are trying to explain the factors which may have produced the drug addicts. So they produce sufficient information explaining that particular phenomenon, that particular reality, or that particular issue. But I think one limitation over here is that they explain the sufficient condition, but they don't explain the necessary conditions, the situation where those who are not drug addicts, why are they not drug addicts? So there we have, but the necessary condition which could produce a particular phenomenon, I think that has limitations, is missing. And then does not tell how many cases to be studied for the confirmation of the validity of a hypothetical explanation. So in the case of quantitative researchers, they talk about the population, they talk about the sample size, they determine the sample size, they have statistical procedures to determine the sample size. But in the qualitative researches, when we have this, let us say, analytic inductive strategy, we do not have specified the number of cases. We just continue moving back and forth between the data collection and data analysis, and continue collecting the information till such time we feel that no more cases are needed, because any new case is not providing anything new. So that has reached the saturation point. So that's a limitation in this inductive strategy, that they do not tell us how many cases are to be considered right in the beginning, but it is the data collection, data analysis which is going to tell us what to do. So this is more of a theoretical, I think, approach. Theoretically or logically, if the researcher thinks that he or she needs more cases, he proceeds. Otherwise, theoretically or logically, if thinks, okay, new cases are useless, okay, they might stop over there. And on that basis, they try to develop a grounded theory. That's, I think, the basic strategy of this inductive approach. So grounded theory is the label associated with the name of Strauss. That grounded theory implies that we try to develop a theory on the basis of the information which we collect. We don't start with the theory, we actually start with the data. Now that theory is something like derived from the data. The data collection, analysis, and eventual theory stand in close relationship to one another. So grounded theory developed out of data, and the approach is, let's say, interwoven, iterative. Data collection and analysis proceed together, repeatedly, let's say, referring back and forth. Now, is this a theory which we come up with a particular theory? Perhaps we do not have that kind of theory. It's more like a procedure for developing a theory. It may be called as a framework, as a model, or as a strategy for moving from the data collection all the way to the development of some kind of a theory. So though all those theories which emerge out of that may be called as grounded theories. As such, if somebody says, okay, this is the definition of a grounded theory, this implies only that the theory which has been developed, it has followed this procedure of, let's say, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and then proceeding from there. Everything is based on, let's say, logical understanding of the researcher. Everything is more based on theoretical justification of the actions of the researcher. So grounded theory is, as such, doesn't appear to be a theory, but an approach to the generation of theory out of the data. Might call it as a framework. So in this approach, what we do is we try to take certain steps. So we have to look for certain, let's say, tools for the development of this grounded theory or to follow this particular strategy. So there are different tools for this framework, and one of the tools for this is theoretical sampling. Now, theoretical sampling is more like a process of data collection for generating theory, whereby the analyst jointly collects, codes, and analyzes his data and decides what data to collect next and where to find it. So that is a theoretical kind of sampling. So what data to collect and where to find it. So it is not the kind of sampling which we had, let's say, in the quantitative research. Here too we talk about the sampling, but it is more like theoretically it's a decision of the researcher, and researcher's decision is based on the interpretation of the data which has been collected. Therefore, the two things, again going back, the two things go together: collection of the data and the analysis of the data. What we have collected, when we analyze, what do we get out of it? Now, whatever we get out of it, how do we interpret it? That helps in taking a decision where to go further. Should we select a similar kind of cases where we are doing the research, or should we, let's say, select the cases for somewhere else? So that is typically a theoretical sampling. Theoretical here means the cases which are to be selected, those are decided by the researcher purely on the basis of the outcome of the analysis, which is continuously being done side by side the data collection. So at the time of data collection, it is, I think, mandatory on the researcher that he should look into the data. For example, he has interviewed a particular person, have its interview transcribed, do the analysis, and through that analysis, what are the interpretations of this interview, what concepts emerge out of that, what categories emerge out of that, and those categories, those concepts help the person to logically determine whether to continue with the same kind of cases or try to find cases somewhere else at a different time or in a different kind of group of people. So that is basically a theoretical sampling. It's not, well, maybe in a way you could call it as a non-probability, but non-probability is again something different. But here it is the information which provides a clue, which provides a justification for the selection of the cases, same place, different timings, different groups. So that is one important tool of the generation of, let's say, grounded theory. So the process of data collection is controlled by the emerging theory. So making comparisons to find out the variations means comparisons between one case and another case, comparisons with respect to the findings which came out from the, let's say, interview of one case with the interview of another case. Now, do we have these comparisons? And these comparisons again determine whether we continue in the same direction or we change the direction of the case. Then with the theoretical coding is the procedure for analyzing data which have been collected in order to develop a grounded theory. Theoretical coding is an important concept of here. So theoretical coding means that we try to develop codes with respect to the concepts which we have with respect to our question to which we want to find an answer. Now here theoretical coding implies, let's say, dividing the available data into different structures, into different groups, maybe compartmentalizing, and these codes might be associated with that group which has been picked up from the data which was being analyzed. Now, these codes could be anything, could be numbers, could be words, could be colors, could be names which are given over there. But certainly these codes have a meaning, and then these codes are given when we give the label to that code. That gives us an image of that reality in that particular category. Now that code becomes more like, or that category becomes more like a bucket, and similar kind of information might be continuously poured into that particular bucket. So the coding is there, and from that coding we try to give labels to it, and the labels could be, let's say, concepts, because concepts have the image of that reality, the picture of that reality, and from those concepts we further develop categories. Similar concepts might be put together, and a higher level concept is, let's say, generated. We may have, let's say, if I'm talking about the present season, we have, let's say, क्या कहते हैं इसको, ये जो किनोज हैं, we have the Malta have, we have different brands of Malta हमें नज़र आते हैं, Musammis हैं, things like that. And these might be the different names, labels given to these realities. And all these realities might be put together, and we have a category, we might use the word as citrus fruit. Okay, citrus fruit is a higher level of concept, higher level of category, which includes a number of previous, let's say, concepts. Now, it becomes difficult to make a distinction between concept and category. Maybe these overlap, and this is, I think, one of the difficulties in the qualitative research, to make that kind of distinction difficult. So we can imagine that in this way, that categories might be higher level of a concept. Rather than concept, I would choose the word higher level of abstraction. And higher level of abstraction, as we move up, then maybe the reality becomes a little difficult to identify. Because when we say citrus fruit, this is an abstract level, and within that we are not sure we are referring to which one. And beyond that, if we simply pick up this fruit and that fruit, we pick up the, let's say, citrus fruit, and we pick up the apples, and we pick up other fruits, and we give another higher level of concept, which is called a fruit. And when we say fruit, we don't know actually which fruit are we referring. So as we move up, we move to the higher level of abstraction. So that's part of the theoretical coding, because the idea is to develop a theory. We try to develop these codes in order to divide the data into different categories, different structures, and on the basis of that we give the labels. And obviously these labels have to be, I think, explained, defined, so that there is some kind of meaningful discussion between the, let's say, reader and the writer. So code the emerging data as it is collected. So that is the interpretation of the data. The third important tool is the theoretical saturation. As I said earlier, saturation is a process that relates to two phases of the grounded theory. One, coding of data. You reach a point in reviewing your data to see how well they fit in with the concepts or categories. And two, collection of the data. So that is how we look at the theoretical saturation. Saturation means reaching the maximum, or looking into the meaning of something. Let's say saturation could also be with respect to the number of categories or possible categories, or appropriate kind of categories which we might have for, let's say, dividing the data into different components, different compartments. So how do these data fit into these categories? Do we have all the possible categories in which this data could be fit in? I think this is the same what we see in the quantitative research, that when we talk about the categories should be exhaustive. Now here too, have we gotten the exhaustive number of categories in which this data can be put in? So we have to see the categories for which the codes are being given and the data. Do they fit with each other? And there's no such data which has been left out. Then the other one was with respect to the data collection. So that is also with respect to theoretical saturation, that we continue collecting data in such a way that we reach a point where no new information is emerging. And since no new information is coming, that time we might stop. Okay, that is the saturation point. So that is another tool for, let's say, grounded theory. So we keep on collecting information so that we have the maximum number of cases supporting the inference, supporting the conclusion, or reaching a particular, let's say, theoretical kind of approach. So that is how we have it. I think this is quite different from the quantitative researchers, where they try to specify their sample size, and this is, I think, different. It has its own good things, good qualities, that we do not specify right in the beginning. We continue collecting in a particular situation. We continue collecting until such time that saturation point has come up. But the only one important difference is that we are focusing on a limited kind of area, a limited kind of situation. It might be a case of an organization, it might be a case of a community, or it could be similar one unit at a particular place. We are not having large number of cases in this particular situation. So the fourth tool is the constant comparison between data and conceptualization. So maintaining a close connection between data and conceptualization so that correspondence between concepts and categories with their indicators is lost. To compare the phenomenon being coded under certain category so that theoretical elaboration of that category begins to emerge. So we continuously keep on, I think, looking into the definition of this category. Does the data fit into that particular category? So that is, I think, the fourth tool of this inductive strategy for the generation of grounded theory. The outcome of the grounded theory, what we have is, we have concepts. We started with coding, theoretical coding, but what do we get out of this framework for the grounded theory? We get the concepts. Now, concepts are, let's say, labels for the images of reality. These concepts stand for that reality. We might call these as terms, and definitely you know that concepts are the building blocks of theory. So we start with these kind of concepts, and these concepts have to be defined, explained. Now, what are the meanings of these concepts? Because if we don't explain the concepts, we cannot communicate, because these concepts become part of the vocabulary, or if we use the word terminology for concepts, well, that terminology might be specific to a particular subjects, but certainly these terminologies have to be explained, have to be defined. Not only these terminologies are to be there, we try to put these terminologies together. We try to make these concepts into, let's say, categories, and these categories are there, let's say, in the reality. We try to find out, is there a connection between these categories? When I say connection, I mean, is there a relationship between these categories? Relationship implies, as you know, does one category influence the other one? Is there an association? What kind of association? Is it a strong kind of association? And I think that association which we have, that leads to the formulation of a, let's say, hypothesis. You might call it in the beginning formulation of one statement, one proposition, and there might be number of connections between these categories, and the number of connections could be resulting in number of, let's say, statements. And if we can have a collection of those statements, then perhaps we could arrange those statements in such a way that there is some kind of chain of those statements. And obviously, you remember, that is one important way to define a theory. The theory is simply, I repeat, it is simply an interrelated set of propositions. So if there has been a connection established, let's say through this data analysis, between the categories, and those categories have been, let's say, converted into statements, because we are trying to explain that connection or that association. And obviously, for explaining that connection, we have to make the sentences. Sentences are actually the propositions, and that leads to not only one sentence, number of sentences, because there is not one category, there are number of categories coming out of that very data. And if we can have a logical connection between all these statements, that is, one statement leads to the next statement, maybe more like an axiomatic kind of relationship between all these propositions, I think that's the emergence of grounded kind of theory. So from data, we move to the theoretical coding. Theoretical coding, we move to, let's say, concepts, categories. Then we have connection between the categories, number of connections between number of categories, and these connections lead to the formulation of propositions which have come up. Let's say, since these are based on the data, these are not to be tested, these have been tested, these have emerged out of the data. I think that's the difference between quantitative and the qualitative research. There they start with the hypothesis and then they test it. Here they have the data, and from that data they try to make connections between different categories. Okay, I use the word categories. Maybe at one point in time the same categories might be considered as variables. So there could be connection between these categories or the variables. And if we can logically establish the relationship, we have evidence for it. And on the basis of that evidence, we interpret that evidence, we formulate a hypothesis. I think that is the emergence of grounded theory. I think difficulty with this is that grounded theory, whichever has been established in a particular area of research, it is confined to that particular, let's say, situation. That is more like a substantive kind of theory. A substantive theory implies a theory which is applicable to this reality, to this corporation or this organization or this locality or this kind of people living in a particular area or an ethnic group or whatever was the topic of the study. Since it is confined only that, because it is based on the data collected from that situation, so that theory is that situation specific. And because it is situation specific, that's why technically it is referred to as, let's say, substantive kind of theory. The field theory or the general kind of theory is not part of the grounded theory. So that's perhaps the limitation of this grounded theory. We also look into, at that time when we are analyzing the data, memos or notes which are more like reminders for, let's say, future consultation or for somebody else. Now, we have the grounded theory, but the grounded theory, as I said, it is limited to a particular, let's say, situation. That's why we call it as a substantive theory. But the formal theory is I think needs more information, maybe doing the same thing in different kind of situations as well. But the grounded theory is good. It has a good framework. We start with the actual, let's say, data, but it has its own limitations. Of course, we say that they are going to develop their own concepts, so they have their own categories. Now, I think it is difficult to have that kind of approach. I think one limitation with respect to the grounded theory is that theory neutral observations are not possible, because the researchers have the background, they have reviewed the literature, they have, let's say, their own reservoir of concepts, and assuming that they are going to develop altogether new concepts, I think that is asking too much. So, and sometimes they are recommended that they might use those concepts which are already there. It becomes easier to understand. Also, they have their own, let's say, theoretical bent of mind. And I would also say that not having any connection with the existing body of knowledge is asking too much. In certain cases, we might see that when a student is submitting the research proposal, it's generally asked, okay, what will be the contribution to the body of knowledge? And when we talk about the contribution to the body of knowledge or the theory in the particular subject, we are demanding that how this present research is going to be connected with that. So we cannot dissociate, disconnect the present work with the existing work, what we call the theory. So it is inductive, of course, but assuming that it doesn't take any help from the existing theories from where it could borrow, let's say, concepts or the logic or the methodology, I think that is asking too much. So the researchers are sensitive to the existing conceptualizations, and they are required in many cases to spell out what these theories are going to do with the body of knowledge. The second limitation is it's doubtful whether the grounded theory really results in a theory. Of course, as I said earlier, it is not a theory. It's more like a methodology. It's more like an approach. It's more like a strategy. It's more like a procedure, a framework to move in a direction. So that is, I think, one important thing. So most grounded theories are substantive in character, as I said earlier, because it is limited to that particular situation. It's not a formal kind of theory. It's less than that. It's more like substantive theory. Then another limitation is that the grounded theory is very much associated with an approach to data analysis. So instead of being constructionist, mostly grounded theory is objectivist. So concepts and categories are labeled by the researcher using his own conceptual armory and do not emerge out of the interaction of the researcher with the actors. So that is how we look at the data analysis with respect to the qualitative research, where our focus is on, let's say, inductive approach. The methodology which is being followed is inductive. We try to generate propositions and hypotheses from the data, and for that purpose, the idea is to continuously keep on looking what we collect and how do we interpret it. So what we collect, that is to be, I think, analyzed simultaneously. There is no such thing in the qualitative research where we have collected the data and then we try to analyze it, because it's as I said, it's interwoven. The data collection and data analysis are interwoven. They it is iterative. Therefore, from that position, we try to develop the concepts, and these concepts are actually the building blocks of the theory, and these concepts could be considered as the terms. And starting with the concepts, we try to develop the connections between these concepts and the higher level of concepts, and the higher level of concepts might be connected with each other. Higher level of concepts, if we use the quantitative terminology, might be the variables, and if we have those connections, then we come up with the propositions and the hypotheses. And these propositions and hypotheses again are supported by the data. And as I said, in the qualitative research, there is a continual collection of the data as well as its analysis. So that hypothesis is being continuously, let's say, tested with the help of the data emerging from the field. So maybe as the data emerges, the hypothesis gets changed, or the procedure could get changed, and on that basis, then the researcher decides with respect to the theoretical sampling, what data are to be collected, where that data are to be collected, and how far is he or she going to go for the collection of data. That's the other thing which I refer to as theoretical saturation. And that is how the data collection and data analysis proceed together. So that is the basics of data management with respect to the qualitative research analysis. Thank you very much.